Welcome everyone to GGN. It's Monday, November 18th, 2013, and I'm Darko. I have a lot of news to get to, so I'm just going to get going here. Cover Middle East news and that. So they're saying here that no European Union nation candidate wants to destroy the Syrian gas. Talking about the chemical weapons. I've covered this before about Lebanon turning them down, Norway turning them down, trying to force it on Albanians and Albania, and people got out there and protested. So this is all part of this big deal. Not a single European Union nation came forward on Monday offering to host the destruction of Syria's poison gas stockpile, with many instead calling for an arsenal to be eradicated close to Syria itself. Yeah, I like this. Belgium had been considered a strong candidate after the withdrawal of Albania, but Belgian foreign minister said, "We have to find a way to send experts and technology on site to transport them over long distances to bring them on our soil. We do not really see how to do that." So, but they were willing to send them to friggin' Norway. So it just goes to show you that they are willing to do that. And so when you see propaganda like this from the New York Times coming out here, selling what they're doing now, West faces challenge in moving Syrian chemical weapons through their battlefields. And what's interesting is they actually admitted this right here, that that Assad in Syria surprised American officials with how speedily he complied with the agreement brokered by Russia to identify and turn over his chemical weapons stockpile. And actually, Assad and them and Syria actually requested transport equipment for these chemical weapons, and the West turned them down. That was on November 12th. Why? Because they care about Al Qaeda and terrorists. Yeah, no shit, right? They said here that the West would turn it down because it says that desired hardware could potentially be used against the rebels, the terrorists, the same terrorists that they're supporting. So they don't want them to use it against the terrorists, because they're all about supporting terrorism in the name of fighting the war on terror. 4 generals among 31 Syrian soldiers killed in a rebel bombing. So the terrorists that the West is supporting killed 31 Syrian soldiers, 4 generals. That's a pretty big deal. Usually big high up type operations like that usually include some kind of help with intelligence coming out of Israel or Britain or the U.S. Bombing leveled a building, and it raised speculation about whether the rebels had infiltrated the military outright or had possibly dug a tunnel underneath the building to fill with explosives. But maybe it was grassroots, because it says here that this was done during the night shift. The bomb was detonated just an hour earlier. The total would have been likely around 200. A faction within the Free Syrian Army took credit for the attack. 2 Lebanese killed while heading to fight in Syria. And this is what we're talking about here. Syrian refugees flood Lebanon and signal decisive battle on their border may have begun. Well, it already has begun, but a long-expected offensive by the Syrian government to capture a key terrorist-held region along the border of Lebanon appeared Sunday to have begun, driving thousands of Syrians across the border to seek refuge in the Lebanese town. And so, yeah, they basically 2 of these terrorists were killed when a mine explosion detonated on their way to Damascus countryside in order to fight for the terrorists against the Syrian army. 2 different stories I came up with today, or found, about women jihadists. This one, Syria's rebel warrior queen, dreams of reforming her brigade, and then one in Baghdad, Iraq. A cell of female suicide terrorists has been arrested in Baghdad. The anti-terrorism forces basically arrested a suicide woman in Baghdad. The cell is composed of several suicide women that drive car bombs through security checkpoints, exploiting the special treatment offered to them by security forces, considering them as women as they park the car bombs in locations allocated to be detonated. As far as the Syria one goes, though, she's 35 years old and a grandmother, protest leader, an armed rebel, and refugee. She's not your typical Syrian woman. So a little nod to, feminism there. It says, "I saw the body in the coffin. From that moment, I was with the revolution. I started taking part in the protests that day." So these are peaceful protesters turned terrorists, hardened Al-Qaeda terrorists. Bombs rattled Baghdad. And they like to say Syrian women too, Syrian women, because most of the majority of the people fighting against the Syrian government are not actually from Syria. So they got to keep that going. They got to keep the term civil war going too as well. Not that it's an invasion of proxy mercenary terrorist forces aided by the West and the Gulf states too. I'll get into them at the end of this video. Bombs rattle Baghdad, 54 killed, 116 wounded. So that's what's going on in Baghdad. There's a usual day for them. I've covered this before, but I'll just read the headline again. A member of the U.S. National Guard's Tactical Human Intelligence Team killed himself. He left a suicide note that says he was forced to commit war crimes against humanity in Iraq. Israel pushing France to obstruct Geneva talks. So at least that's what we're hearing. Israel and Saudi Arabia cooperating on possible attack on Iran. So I don't know if this is just a bunch of junk because it's coming out of Ynet, an Israeli site, but this is what they're saying. I've covered recently how it kind of seems like, I know Israel's kind of a proxy state. It's the Rothschilds banking dynasty and the Jews banking and all that, oligarchs, their own little smuggling or money laundering corporation or company known as Israel. And they're able to get away with genocide and all kinds of horrible stuff. But they get protection because of the Holocaust, I guess. And in Saudi Arabia, nobody says anything about human rights violations. Not saying that we should go and bomb them or force them to change leadership. That's their own internal situation or problem that they have to deal with. But to carry it out and say this is a peaceful protest against the Bashar, the dictator, the repressive regime in Syria, and then look the other way for Saudi Arabia and somewhere like Bahrain, well then that just goes to show you that they're full of shit, just like they're aiding terrorists while fighting the war on terror supposedly. But maybe this is true, because like I said, it does seem like Israel, as far as politically, seems kind of weak, or weakened at least, along with Saudi Arabia too. Been covering them a lot lately. They're going to have, what's going to cause these protests in Saudi Arabia that could lead to destabilization in that area, in the region, of course, even more, would be prices, and unemployment and stuff like that. And it could lead to that. Like I said, it has to do with oil. The U.S. is a big producer. And then you have Iran, of course, getting in there as well. I'm about to get to that. Israel pushing France to obstruct. So they're saying here, a senior Iranian lawmaker says French conditions for Iran, basically right before the negotiations. It says here that the Israeli regime's directives are aimed at spoiling the upcoming talks. It says the demands of the Zionists and their allies and all those who receive orders from this regime. So, then from NDTV, it says here that they're noticing from Africa to Middle East, France's new hawkishness. So on the front line, Libya, Mali, hawkish on Syria, uncompromising on Iran. France, long critical of the U.S. role as the world's policeman, is emerging as the most interventionist of the Western states. So what's going on? How come all of a sudden the United States is against sanctions against Iran? Probably has something to do with the dollar, the petrodollar, oil prices. Like I said before, shoring up more assets or the ability to keep the system going. The Western Rothschild banking Zionist type system going. Until February when they have to do this whole, government closure crap again. Iran's return to the oil market could send prices diving. And then toothless sanctions, at least that's what they call it. They said Iranian oil trade is booming. And China is the top buyer, so maybe it has something to do with keeping China's economy going. Pakistani, Saudi role in financing and training the Jaish al-Adl, whatever, active in Iran CIS. It's a new group launching attacks in the Iranian province of Sistan. So they start talking about these Soldiers of God, the Jundullah, a group which has worked militarily against Iran from Pakistan before being exterminated by Iran in 2010. This was after a 3-year truce following the arrest of this Abdul Malik Raiki by Iranian authorities. So they're saying this army of right might actually be the same thing, same leadership. But basically they're saying that these are Salafi groups supported by Saudi Arabia. I saw this article and it's like I laughed and I kind of got angry, but I don't know why. It's just, this is something that they perpetuate, like the civil war in Syria, and that the bloody disaster of Libya, Iraq, and Afghanistan is laid bare. So It was a disaster. It's not what it was intended to be, which is to create a failed state and create refugees and get the drug trade and the smuggling of arms going and the radicalizing of terrorists going. That was a success, but they like to call it a disaster. That's how they play the mind games on the regular people. U.S.-led troops pull out may be behind Afghanistan record opium poppy crop. So they're more record opium poppy crop because the U.S. is going to be pulling out. No, actually, it increased, remember? So that was a success. So they're saying, maybe we should stay there. Have Marines protecting the poppy fields. American troops are protecting the Afghan opium. U.S. occupation leads to all-time high heroin production. So that's an operation success, not a disaster, not a failure. Afghan villagers find bodies of 6 beheaded workers. So 6 government contractors Sunday in the country's south region said they're victims of insurgents who regularly target state projects. Okay, moving on to Libya. That was another disaster, right? No, it's a success. Libya's deputy spy chief kidnapped at airport. Now that may be a failure because they want to be able to at least get the oil out of there and the resources. So they do want some sort of security for the resources. Libya's deputy and of course the companies, the oil companies, they're not going to do it themselves. That'll cut into their profit margins. Libya's deputy intelligence chief was kidnapped outside Tripoli's international airport on Sunday, a month after the prime minister was snatched by militiamen. So kidnapping clashes in the capital have killed dozens of people. So that's why they're going to have the EU taxpayers and whatever else taxpayers fund this. I'll get into this here about the EU civilian mission training paramilitaries in Libya. Egypt's Interior Ministry says gunmen killed high-ranking national security officer in Cairo. So, again, this is in Egypt. This is another success in Egypt. I'm not sure if they actually did it, but there was talk about the U.S. actually retracting aid from Egypt. So this is what they want. It emboldens Israel, too, to go on the attack in the Sinai and elsewhere, carry out attacks against Syria, actually, literally, airstrikes against it. Nobody says anything about it. State of emergency declared in Libyan capital, says here, and this was after the deputy spy chief was kidnapped at the airport. Libyan prime minister urges former terrorists or rebels to leave Tripoli as fresh clashes leave 1 dead after more than 40 were killed. Libyan government deploys troops to Tripoli after anti-militia protesters were attacked by armed militiamen. You have to remember, there was actually people in the eastern part of Libya and the western part of Libya that were armed militias, regular militias, that, talking about just people getting together, not sanctioned by the government, that were taking control of oil fields and production and creating their own armies. So this is happening around that. So that's why you have this, right? AFRICOM considers counterterrorism force and training mission for Libyan security, creating a 5,000 to 7,000 conventional soldier force, and of course a smaller unit for special counterterrorism missions. That's what the U.S. military is considering. Back to the European Union civilian mission, training paramilitaries in Libya. The EU's civilian border mission in Libya is, in fact, training paramilitary forces amid a wider European and U.S. effort to stop Libya becoming a failed state. Again, there you go, see? Would have to say, no, that's so that they can, so troops or whoever it is, or the U.S. and them taxpayers can fund to create a more reliable security force to secure the resources. Sounds redundant, but can't always rely on armed militias sanctioned by the state, that are haphazardly armed and trained. Gulf states seek integrated air defense. So what's the threat? But they said they want to integrate their air defense systems to meet threats from ballistic and cruise missiles. The GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, is expanding its army, but for what, right? For what threat? It's expanding force designed to defend against Iran or prevent an Arab Spring in the oil-rich Gulf. Then this is all, April 17, 2013. Experts at Abu Dhabi Summit want the GCC military integration. They want to establish a military command system able to exchange and share info at the click of a button. Remember, we just covered this. Qatar approves compulsory military service for men, the first of its kind. More news in China. 9 attackers and 2 officers reported killed in western China. This is GGN, and I'm Darko. Thank you.